Hello, is there anybody out there? So can anyone hear me? This is, if anybody can hear me, obviously this is an experiment. I'm trying to set up stuff so that I can do live presentations and chats. If you can hear me, say yo yo yo. Nice. Okay. There we go. So this is a brave new world for me. So I'm using my laptop, which I don't usually use for this kind of stuff. But it occurred to me that I've got, obviously it's a laptop, so it's got a built-in webcam on it, and I can probably use it for this. Nice. Yo yo yo. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so I can use it for. Hi, Matthew Papworth. How you doing? Good to see you. Um, wow, there's loads of you there. That's crazy. It's really funny. Um, yeah, Tane, I am indeed on lockdown. Pretty much, we're allowed to go out for one piece of exercise per day. So we did get out for a walk today. We live near a big National Trust park, basically. So we managed to go for a nice walk. It was good to get out of the house. I don't have a full screen working at the moment. Okay, hold on. Let's see if I can fix that. Um, is that better? Have I now got a full screen? Can I make a video on the Shashka? Yeah, I probably can. I have talked about the Shashka previously, but what to say about them? They're interesting. You probably know anyway, but the Russian, I guess you might be Nikolay, you might be Russian actually, so you might know more about this than me. But the Russians did go to having a full guard Shashka, and then they went back again to having the no guard Shashka, and I think it was a sort of partly a kind of maybe I don't know patriotic nationalistic thing. The design I've spoken about in a couple of videos recently actually that the design of weapons is not always about functionality. Actually, we like to think it is, but it's not always about what works best. Not to say that there's anything wrong with the shashka, but often, if you look at Japanese swords, for example, the Kaiyu Gunto from the Second World War, before the Second World War actually, then the Japanese kind of moved to things with saber hilts, and then they went back to kind of katana hilts again, and that was for sort of, I suppose, heritage and nationalistic pride and this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's complicated stuff. There are so many messages here. A video on military rapiers from Rami. Rami, you send me a lot of requests, and I appreciate them. I can't keep up with them all. But yeah, military rapiers. Yeah, that's a kind of tricky topic, but I'll have a think about it. And what else have we got here? Greetings from Vienna. Hi. I love Vienna. I've been to Vienna two or three times, I think. Three times. Beautiful, beautiful city. I'd love to go back. Take Lucy there at some point. Have I seen a windlass 1860 naval cutlass? I'm afraid I haven't. No. Generally speaking, windlass replicas of historical swords tend to be a bit too thin at the base of the blade and not have enough distal taper, but that's not always the case. And I have actually seen some custom-made stuff from windlass, and they can make really, really good stuff, but I'm afraid I haven't seen that model. Any more Roman videos coming? Absolutely, yes. So there's more Pelham videos coming. And I saw scutum and scrotum there, so I see what all the comments were about. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be doing more on penetration. Surprise, surprise. But yeah, I'm going to be doing more with the Pelham, definitely. I've actually got two pilla, and the one that I've been using in the videos has actually got a crack in the wood, which I haven't put up on because it's kind of unfair. It's not. I've been quite abusing that Pelham, so it's not necessarily a criticism of it. And actually, Fabrica Cacti, who make them, are sending me a replacement. So no big issue. And I've got another one anyway. So yeah, I'm going to be doing various more tests. I want to do some anti-shield stuff, demonstrations with the pilla. I'm just waiting for the right weather conditions and having time. I guess for anyone who's locked down with kids, you know, it's quite we're now homeschooling. So our daughter is just coming up to 7 years old. So we've been homeschooling her, and we've got a baby as well. So we've kind of got our hands full at the moment. That's okay, Rami. You're welcome. Just see your thanks there. Right, let's have a look at some other of these messages. So messages are coming in so fast, I can't read them quick enough. Greetings from Vienna. I did that. The Windlass 1860 naval cutlass. I haven't seen it. Can you tell anything about? Oh, that's interesting. Archery in medieval hunting. I can tell you one interesting thing about archery in medieval hunting, which I should probably stick in a video at some point, and that is that they used to camouflage themselves. And this is, people think of camouflage as a modern thing, but the medieval hunters used to sometimes camouflage themselves even as animals and trees and all kind of stuff like this. It's quite funky. So I'll do a bit more research into that and put that into a video at some point. But at the Royal Armouries in Leeds, they've got a nice mock-up of someone hiding inside basically a mocked-up deer, I think it is, with a crossbow. But there's lots of other interesting things to say about medieval hunting as well. As you probably know, certainly in England, and I believe in lots of other European countries, only certain people were allowed to go into the forest with bows or crossbows and hunt. It was the reserve of the aristocracy for a large part, and hence the whole Robin Hood myths and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, you could hunt, but you could only hunt certain things. And that's why if you look at the Luttrell Psalter, you can see peasants or farmers doing things like catching small birds and shooting rabbits and things like this, because they're allowed to do that, but they weren't allowed to shoot deer, famously. Landsknechts Emporium. Yes, I can almost say Landsknechts now. I'm working on it. There's some interesting questions here. I can't do all of them, I'm afraid. I'm sorry for that. This is interesting. In historical European warfare, were warhounds used? And that's from Dan Bro. Do you know what? Yes, I think they were, but it's not something I've specifically researched. But I think there is some limited evidence for it. I do know there's a nice allegorical story that's probably not true about a mastiff dog that was taken to the Battle of Agincourt, and the dog stood over the fallen dead body of its owner. But to know the full story of that, I'd have to look it up. Reading down the. Have I seen Ilya's video where he responds to Shad and says that the modern HEMA techniques over rely on the strength of modern steel? I would be curious to know your thoughts on that. Now that, from the Scholar General, that is a very good question, and actually one which I have touched on. I've alluded to in a number of videos, actually, and I do agree with that, certainly. That the fact is that modern steel, it just so happens, I have an Albion here, and I just received it a couple of days ago. So this is the Albion Lancaster, which I'm very happy with, mid 15th century style of arming sword, and 100%, yeah, these swords that we rely on, the steel that we trust in now, is much more consistent quality. And I would sort of say better quality, but I have to qualify that for a second. So I won't say that all, like the best quality medieval swords might be as good as a modern Albion, although some people would argue not even that. But what we could say is that, generally speaking, 95% of medieval swords are not going to be as reliable in their heat treatment and their sort of the homogeneity of the I don't know what the word is, the reliableness of the steel, basically, because it will have slag inclusions and all this kind of stuff. and possibly variations in the amount of carbon in the blade, which means that when you heat treat it, it gives you different results in different parts of the blade, makes some parts of the blade might be a little bit too hard, some might be a little bit too soft. There was a good article, and I think it was on the Arms and Armour website, if I remember correctly, and I haven't seen it for years, but I read it years ago, and it basically analysed doing Rockwell hardness testing along some historical European swords, and it basically, the conclusion was that the hardness varied quite a bit, and that was mostly because the steel varied in consistency through its length. So when you heat treated it, it had different results in different parts of the blade. So to cut a long story short, yes, medieval swords were not as reliable as modern ones in terms of their material structure, and therefore I think, you look at medieval art, and I've spoken about this before, you look at medieval art and there are lots of broken weapons in medieval art. And so I think, yes, people do abuse swords and other weapons to some extent in the modern world, because life and death doesn't depend on it for the most part, and we trust in the modern materials and quality. So absolutely, I think that in some cases people do things which are too harsh with swords, which people may have been a little bit more careful with them to some degree, not precious with them, like edge damage, not so bothered about that because that just happens. But you don't want your weapon to break in combat if you can avoid it at all, because if your weapon breaks, well, then you're potentially disarmed. Right, I spent a long time on that one question, but that is the Scholar General. That is a fairly good point, I think. I actually don't know Ilya's video, and I don't know what Shad said, but based on just reading your paragraph there, yeah, it sounds like a valid point. So greetings from Canada. Hi, Canada. Canada's one of the countries I'd definitely consider living in. Seems like a great country. Oh, there's even another question about the Shashka here. Shashka were good. This is from Lowbro. Shashka were good. You can draw them with thick winter mittens since they have no guard. That's actually a very good point. A very good point, and that shouldn't be underestimated, that kind of point. Look who's just, I know you guys, it's Oscar Cattinson. Oscar, come here. No, he doesn't want, Oscar Cat doesn't want to come. Cat Eastern, as he's widely known. Yeah, that's a very good point. And actually, George Silver talks about the fact that, despite the fact that everyone thinks of George Silver as being a basket-hilted broadsword or backsword source, he actually talks about the fact that one of the disadvantages of an enclosed basket hilt is that you can't necessarily get your hand into it quickly to pull your sword out. As I always kind of emphasize in my videos, your sword is a sidearm, and actually being able to pull it out at the moment you need it is very, very important. And it's a bit like a pistol or a knife, in modern combat. It's something you want to be able to get out quickly. It's not necessarily the thing that you've already got in your hand when the fight starts. But yeah. So Avant-Garde Student asks me, why do you think weapons from the Byzantium don't get much attention? Because they're not much known about, not many people study them, basically. Why don't people study them? I don't know. So clearly, I'm English, so I was at school and university, I was focused on British history. I know some things about Byzantine history. I know that 1453 was the fall of Constantinople. And I know some things about some Byzantine armour and weapons. Everyone knows about the Varangian Guard, but I know about some of the later period stuff as well. I think it's just not widely studied, and sometimes you need to get the ball rolling to get an interest in the thing. But it only takes one YouTuber, for example, who's got a big interest in the Byzantine Empire to start making videos about it, and suddenly everybody will want to be recreating Byzantine armours and all of this kind of stuff. But I just don't know. There's definitely a kind of Western, or should we say Northwestern European bias to history in general. There's an Anglo bias to history, so loads of people from all over Europe know about the 100 Years' War. They know about the Battle of Agincourt. Why? It was one battle between an English-led army and a French-led army, although there were French people in the English army, and I think there were Scots on the French side, certainly in later 100 Years' War battles there were. But that's just one battle in 1415. Why does everyone know about it? And it's largely because of I guess, British and American kind of Anglo kind of media spreading this kind of interest in our kind of history, I suppose. And that hasn't happened so much with Greek history, certainly Greek medieval history. Greetings from the Bahamas. Wow, cool. Fan King 5. I really wish that I was in lockdown in the Bahamas right now. I've got to say, the weather's not terrible here, but I'd definitely rather be in the Bahamas. Dan says greetings from California. I'd love to be in California as well. Lovely. I have been in California only once in my life, but I did like it. What have we got here? My thoughts on... So Tane Gurnick asks what my thoughts are on the Albion Sovereign. I have held it. It's a lovely sword. What to say about it? Yeah, it's a really nice cut and thrust sword. Most Albions are. And that's a funny thing, actually, talking about Albions. Clearly, I own a few Albions. I've just been showing one. I'll pick it up again so that we've got a sword in shot. I think you can probably see some bayonets over my shoulder. I'm a big fan of Albions, but one thing that has to be said is that Albion are crowd pleasers. And you can't blame them for that. You can't criticise them for that. Oscar's just come back. Let's see if I can... There we go. Here's Oscar the cat, just for you, because I know you like to see him. He always loiters around when it's time for his nighttime feed. And on that note, I will have to head off in a minute, actually, because I've got to do baby feeding and cat feeding and locking up. But yeah, Albions are crowd pleasers, and so they do tend to make swords that the modern audience will like and will be popular, and they'll want to buy them, and they'll say, wow, these handle great. And to a certain extent, the swords, and I've spoken about this in previous videos, but the swords which don't necessarily handle how a modern person likes a sword to feel. So there are swords which are heavier and are more blade heavy and or are more hilt heavy, and there's swords which aren't necessarily kind of in the average of what modern people want and like, and they don't get reproduced very much because that's not what modern people want for the most part. I've handled some 11th and 12th century and 13th century swords that actually, as objects in your hand, didn't feel nice at all. They actually felt quite horrible. And so no one replicates those because they think they won't be popular. But they were real things. And why do they handle horribly? Because they were balanced to be great big choppers used in conjunction with a shield. So they weren't supposed to feel like lovely, nimble swords used by themselves like a saber would be. They were intended as cleavers to be used with a shield. So they weren't heavy, but they were blade heavy. They're balanced quite far out from the hand. Anyway, the Albion Sovereign is nice. It's a nice handling sword for most modern people, I'd say. Hola from Argentina. Jose Visky, maybe. Italian name, maybe? Yeah, hi, Argentina. Again, another place I'd like to visit one day, potentially. Peter's talking about different weapons he's like, tomahawks and cutlasses and rapiers and other kinds of stuff. Greetings from Slovenia. Hey, a good friend of mine is half Slovenian. Yeah, another lovely place that I need to visit at some point. I've heard it's got very nice beaches. Do you know... Okay, A. Ronk says, do you know of any good Zulu War swordsmanship accounts? So the Zulu War is quite an interesting one in that it's not interesting for swordsmanship. So there's a lot of combat accounts from the Zulu War, but actually swords weren't used very much. They were used a bit, mostly by cavalry actions in the Zulu War, but there's quite a bit of close combat encounters with guns used at close range and bayonets occasionally. But actually there's very little references to swords being used in the Zulu War. Whereas there's a lot, in contrast, there's a lot from the Sudan War, which, bear in mind, is only, 5 years later, 1884 to 1886, 7, 8 kind of period. But basically 1884, 1885 are the main active years. And yeah, from the Sudan War, you've got loads of swordsmanship accounts. From the Zulu War, not really. Different context, different environment, different landscape, different opponents, different tactics. So yeah, there isn't much from the Zulu War, unfortunately. Oh, cool. So PBR Street Gang said, watch my training video this morning, practice with you all morning. So I'd really want to do more training videos. Sorry, I've always said that I want to do more training videos, but deciding what to put in. The problem is that when you run a class, you know the people in the class, and so you know what to teach them based on what they can do and what they need to work on. When you're just teaching blind to a bunch of people on the internet, who some of them might be experienced HEMA practitioners, some of them you might know, you might have competed against or trained with, or they may have trained you, or conversely, there might be people who've never even been to one HEMA lesson. So it's very difficult actually pitching YouTube training, videos, classes essentially online, because you don't know what your audience is. But anyway, it's great to know that whatever I put up is useful to someone. Just reading comments now, trying to find. Rami has come back with another good question. Rami has a lot of good questions. What about accounts of swords used in the trenches? I don't know of many, but I did come across one actually, and if I remember correctly, it was an Australian officer, and it was a Turkish trench. It was the Gallipoli campaign, and he jumped into a trench and skewered a load of Turkish soldiers with his sword. I think he shot some with a revolver and then skewered some with his sword. And I believe he's a Victoria Cross winner, so you might be able to find him. I can't remember his name, unfortunately, off the top of my head. So Nish has said, hello, I'm half Sri Lankan, and I was wondering if you knew anything about Sri Lankan weaponry. Was it any different from Indian weaponry? Well, funnily enough, I do know a bit about Sri Lankan weaponry, and yes, it was very different to Indian weaponry. And it wasn't long ago that I was talking with my friend Gavin about this very topic, and I was musing at why is Sri Lankan weaponry so different to Indian weaponry. Now, not to say you didn't necessarily, you probably did get some Indian weapons in Sri Lanka as well, like tulwars and the common popular stuff. But actually, Sri Lankan weaponry is very distinctive. So I can't give a full presentation on this now, but the piaketa, I believe it's pronounced, is a very particular type of knife, which is purely from, as it was known then, Ceylon, or now Sri Lanka. And also there's the castane, which is a type of sword, which is kind of what a European of the time would call a hanger. It's essentially a short saber. And it's both those things and other things from Sri Lanka are very, very different to Indian stuff. And when you consider the proximity geographically, it's very clear to me that Sri Lanka took a lot of cultural influences from other parts of Asia, other than India. And importantly, Sri Lanka seems to have taken quite a lot of interaction and influence with Europe as well. More so, perhaps, in terms of its material culture than India did in the early days. And I wonder, I don't know because it's not something I've researched, but I wonder if that's something to do with trading networks. And I think that there was a significant Portuguese and or Spanish interaction in Sri Lanka. So I wonder if that was an important part of it. And I also know of one 17th century painting. If I remember correctly, it's a Dutch, so there might be Dutch East India Company stuff there as well. A Dutch guy on a horse, 17th century, he's in full Dutch, like English Civil War period, middle of the 17th century, kind of full typical Dutch aristocracy on a horse, but the sword he's wearing is a Sri Lankan castane sword, which is awesome, because it's like, why? Why has he got a Sri Lankan sword on? And we don't know the answer. We do know that in some Dutch paintings from the 17th century, they show Japanese weapons, and it's possible that this is alluding to the fact that, look, I'm part of this great trading network, or maybe he had a great mercantile business, maybe he had a big business, maybe he was just very rich, maybe he collected stuff, who knows? But again, we should always look beyond, it's very unlikely that he was just wearing a Sri Lankan sword because he thought that's an awesome weapon. It's what it represents. The fact that he's chosen to wear that to pose for a painting means that he's trying to represent something about his own education or wealth or power or something. Who knows? Right, I look like Bruce Willis. My God. I'd need to... I'm the wrong shape for Bruce Willis, I think, but I definitely got bald head. Right, I'm just scrolling down here. I'm only going to be able to answer a few more points, I think, because I'm going to need to log off in a minute. I'm glad that this experiment has worked anyway. Oh, let's hear. So Samawar Jacob from Poland says Western saber combat practice versus Eastern. If I understand things correctly, the more west you go, the more saber combat was about quick lunges, thrusting and attacking from the wrist. It's not quite as simple as that. Actually, I mean, if you look at later, if you look at Russian, so if we go fully east, as it were, if you look at Russian military saber treatises, which I have looked at a few, I've looked at probably about 5. They're actually very similar to Western European by the 19th century. So I'm not going to get into the whole topic of Polish saber because we don't really have any real Polish saber sources until really almost the end of the 19th century. We've got one from 1830, but most of what people are doing as Polish saber is reconstruction from various other sources, including Dusak. So it's kind of a different thing. If we're just looking at military saber from the 19th century, then if you look at the Russian stuff and you look at the British stuff, there's a lot of parallels. There are some differences as well, but you can clearly see that Angelo, for example, was influential in a lot of different countries. And you can find American manuals that were influenced by Angelo, and I believe at least one Russian manual that was influenced by Angelo as well. And it has to be pointed out that the Tsar of Russia had a French fencing instructor. So I think that French, in the 19th century, French fencing kind of pollinated right the way across Christian Europe, should we call it. Anyway, that's a big topic. Let's move on quickly. Yeah, okay, yeah. So wow, the comments are coming in pretty much in real time now. That's do you have a Knil, Knil Kliwang? I did have a Kliwang until recently, but I sold it, so no, I don't have any Kliwangs at the moment. So Mark Persad says, is there any evidence that European countries in the 17th to 18th century sourced their swords from countries other than, that's scrolling up too quickly for me, other than their own home sources? Yeah, yes, absolutely. For example, in the 17th to 18th century, we know that some Polish and Hungarian sabers, for example, used German blades. I know that's relatively close geographically. Equally, we know that Indian and Middle Eastern blades came into Europe as well and were used on various swords. And I've mentioned the Sri Lankan sword as well, and I've mentioned Japanese swords. So yeah, it wasn't common, but it did definitely happen. So Lucient says, can I expect to run into you on Bannerlord, sir? I would think that would be 100% yes. I'm very much looking forward to Bannerlord. Although I'm a little bit reluctant, I'm a little bit nervous about whether my computer can handle it. Because I don't know how heavy it'll be on my. Different games seem to behave very differently on my computer, and my computer's a few years old now, so I might be having to look to update it. I've got my laptop's quite new, but my desktop that I game on is a little bit slow, unfortunately. But assuming I can run Bannerlord without driving me crazy. So I tried to play Mordhau, and Mordhau does not run well on my computer at all, unfortunately. One of my good friends plays Mordhau a lot, and I know has made a character that looks like me, which I find hilarious. But anyway, yeah, if Bannerlord runs for me, I'll be very happy for it, because I love Mount and Blade, as you guys know. So MMS Huang says, hey Matt, thanks for the live stream. Ever been told that I look like a younger and taller Mike Loads? Little known fact, I actually know Mike Loads. And Mike Loads was the main reason that I kind of got into HEMA. Because when I was a teenager, he used to... So I started collecting antique swords when I was about 16. And Mike Loads used to go to the antique arms fairs and sell videos on essentially theatrical swordplay. Anyway, so I met him there, bought a video, and I watched that for years. It was a great inspiration to me. And I've met him a couple of times as an adult, and he's a lovely guy, and I have communicated with him a number of times. As you know, I have one of his books that he sent me, and I've done a video about the stuff. He's a really, really nice guy. He was someone that I wish I knew a little bit better, because he seems like a great guy and a lot of fun and really fascinating. But yes, I guess I'm English and bald, and I'm taller than Mike. Yeah, da da da. How does one cook with a cook with a cook with a kukri? Cut with a kukri. Max Bakvarov. Sorry about that. Max Bakvarov. How does one cut with a kukri? You basically hit with it. It's actually quite easy. Don't overthink it. You want to have a bit of a stiff wrist, so different people do it differently, I guess. But the way that I found cuts best is if you actually, a bit like a talwar, you kind of draw the hand through it, almost like you're punching, but not. But don't straighten the blade out in line with the forearm. You leave it angled back a bit, like a curved sword, basically. But the forward curve of the blade does the kind of chopping for you. But kukris, as you can imagine, they cut really, really well. Nicholas Pradovan says Maori warfare. I freaking love that bit of history. I love Maori weapons. I love what I've read about the culture. It's fascinating stuff. Obviously, all the tattoos and everything, the martial culture of the Maoris is awesome. But also the 19th century, the so-called New Zealand land wars are also very, very interesting as well. The musket wars and then the land wars. And so I have read about it, but I'm not sure that... I know Lindy Beige did a really good video about one of the sieges during the Maori wars. But yeah, it's awesome stuff. I'm not sure that I know enough about it to just make a video off the top of my head, but maybe I'll research something and do some kind of presentation. So, deuxième voltigeur, I never know how to say that word. The second voltigeur says, do you have any love for Dutch cavalry sabers? They're all right. I don't have anything against them. I've got to be honest, outside of British... so everyone probably knows I like French swords quite a lot. Obviously, I love British ones, I love French ones. Prussian and German swords can be either love or hate for me, but I really like Austrian swords. So I'm a big fan of, if I was only going to collect one nationality of swords other than British, it would be Austrian, probably. Russian swords are very interesting, but they're very hard to come by. And it has to be said, the ones that I have come across can either be really good quality or really poor quality. Don't know why that is. Elder Shrub says, hello from Australia. Love your content. Thank you very much. It's much appreciated. I know you specialise in antique arms, but have you ever wanted to make content about other aspects of ancient or military history, e.g. logistics? Yeah, yes, I love to, but I don't feel expert enough to talk about that stuff. I leave that to other people. So I try, for the most part, as you know, I try to stay in my field of expertise as much as I can. I don't like to feel like I'm BSing on topics. I have to be honest, sometimes I feel... So HEMA has become quite popular for YouTube content, and sometimes I find it a bit frustrating when people who don't really do HEMA talk about HEMA a lot on their channels. And that's great because it helps publicize HEMA, but it also can be frustrating because you kind of... I kind of, to a certain extent, I wish people would stay within their areas of expertise. But if you're making a YouTube channel, you have to keep churning videos out, and you can be interested in something and not be an expert at it. So that's fine. But to be completely honest, the reason that I started my channel is because I could see more and more people on YouTube talking about HEMA who weren't actually HEMA practitioners. And, I've now been running a club since the year 2000, pretty much. My club was named in 2001. And I've been practicing since 1997. Now, that's not to say, for the first early years of HEMA, we were kind of quite slow moving because we were in the kind of translating and interpretation stage of HEMA back then. But the fact is that I wish that more experienced HEMA people would make video content and represent their expertise. I'm not going to make a video about Spanish rapier because I don't really know anything about it, but I wish that the people that do know about it would make more videos about it, or at least do videos that get more exposure. And something that I've always wanted to do more, I've done it a bit, but something I've always wanted to do more is try and get more experts about specific things onto my channel. So, get Dave Rawlings, get Rob Runacres, get all those people out there who are expert on, true experts on specific things onto my channel to talk about those things. because I'd rather have an expert talk about the thing rather than me kind of just blagging it. Victor, hey dude, Victor Harder Hessel says, do you know any Danish saber treatises? I'm afraid not, no, not off the top of my head. Obviously, you know the Swedish ones, and there's Prussian ones, but you in the middle there, in Denmark, off the top of my head, I've never heard of a Danish saber treatise, sorry. Right, I'm going to have to do, 3 more questions or points here. So Centuri Chan says, why do you think Eastern swords, not Eastern, but East swords are more romanticized than Western swords under the context of the Western perspective? I'm not so sure that they are, actually. I think kind of in the internet age, particularly katanas have been romanticized hugely, but I don't necessarily think that, you know, Chinese swords have been at all, the Dao and the Zhan and stuff. I mean, obviously things like anime and, you know, kind of movies, I guess going all the way back to kind of samurai movies, Kurosawa films and stuff like that. But there was a romanticization actually of Japanese swords going way back in the West, and they're good. There's no beating around the bush. So, you know, in my early days, I did try to kind of counter the kind of the Weibo kind of Japanese katana fanboy-ism, but it has to be said, and as I hope I've pointed out in more recent videos, Japanese blade making was superb, and it was recognized in Europe as superb, and you know, it's not to say that necessarily Japanese sword blades were suited to Western warfare at that time. Certainly in the age of medieval plate armor, Japanese swords aren't really designed to go up against European armor. They're designed to go up against Japanese armor, obviously. But just purely in terms of constructional quality, yes, they were romanticized because they were very good, partly. But also, the exotic always has an attraction, doesn't it? And the other thing we have to say, so in the modern world, outside of my channel, probably, there isn't an awful lot of attention given to, for example, Middle Eastern and Turkish swords, the kilich, and Damascus steel or woots. But really, historically, there really, really was. And there was as much or more love and mystique about woots and Damascus steel and the kilich and the shamshir. There was as much hype about those then, centuries ago, up until, well, right the way through the 19th century, there was as much hype about those as there was about Japanese swords. In fact, more, really. And when you look at what did generals' swords, what were they modelled on? They were modelled on the kilich and the shamshir. They weren't modelled on Japanese swords. And why? Well, it's for many things. Partly quality, partly mystique, I guess. Right, 2 more. I must limit myself to only 2 more questions. Hey, this is a really good one. Laura E. Says, how would rapier deal with armoured combat? Could you half-sword it? Yes, the answer to that is, and in fact we do. In Giganti, I think you see half-swording with rapier in various sources. It's not common, but you do occasionally see half-swording with rapier. It's commonly used in anachronistic combinations in fantasy games. That's a very good point, actually, and it's something actually thinking about and make a really good video if someone hasn't done it already, that you do absolutely get mismatched technology in fantasy settings. You get one person using like a Viking style sword and a shield, and you get another person using a rapier, and it's like, how do those 2 things exist in the same time and world? It's just kind of weird, and that does bother me. That does bug me slightly when in kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons kind of context, in role-playing games mostly. But to go back to the first part of the question, how would a rapier deal with armoured combat? Not very well, I think is the answer. Rapiers just aren't really designed for armoured combat. But if I had a rapier, and rapiers were used with demi-armours, certainly at least, you know, there were full armours were around at the same time as rapiers. It's just that they weren't usually used a lot in conjunction. I guess they just thrust in the gaps, and ultimately armoured fighting, even in the 14th, 15th century, is about thrusting in the gaps most of the time and grappling. And you can grapple with a rapier, and you can thrust in gaps with a rapier. So I guess it'd be kind of the same, but the rapier is not so well suited to it, I would say. And the other thing is the rapier hilt is not very well suited to wearing a gauntlet. And obviously, if you're armoured, you'd be wearing a gauntlet. But if you were a pikeman with a rapier and your opponent was a cuirassier who'd come off his horse, so you've got a fully armoured person in front of you with probably a basket-hilt broadsword or some other kind of cut and thrust sword coming at you, and you've just got a rapier, you drop your pike or your pike's lost or whatever, what do you do? Well, I would say maintain distance. Don't necessarily get into a grapple with the armoured person because you'll get turned into tenderized meat, and you'll be trying to thrust at gaps. But by and large, use a polearm, use a halberd or a bill or whatever, spear. Getting into a sword fight with someone who's got full armour on, probably not the best idea in the world. Levi or Levi Lozano, hello. The Ghost Hero says, have you had any takuba? Yes, I've got one actually at the moment in my garage, and I've been meaning to do a video about it for months, and I never get around to it, but I will do. Right, I'm going to scroll down quickly. Jogoda Pau, yeah, again, something I've witnessed at events I've been teaching at, but not something I personally know much about. Jogoda Pau is essentially the Portuguese staff fighting. There's Victor. Oh, the scroll just went away. Sorry, Victor Harder Hessel says, "Can you comment on the Battle of Rocroi as depicted in Alatriste, specifically the Battle of the Pikemen?" Do you know what? I've seen Alatriste. I might even have it on DVD actually, but I have seen it. I didn't even know that was the name of the battle, and I'm afraid I don't know anything about the battle at all. And that's complete honesty there. Can I comment on the battle? Yeah, it was pretty good. I can't really remember it very clearly, so I'll have to go back and look at it. Yeah, right. I think hello from Moscow. Hey, I can't read your name, I'm afraid, because I don't know Cyrillic letters. But hello, hi in Moscow. Good to see you there. Right, I'm going to pick one last question before I log off. Let's see. Did he ID the kidney-shaped thing? That question, I'll just leave that one hanging there. Michelle says, I was expecting a wall full of swords. I know, I wish. I've got the swords, but I haven't yet worked out the hanging solutions. I've bought so many hooks and none of them work. Wow, there's so many comments coming in. Right, here we go. This is the last one I'm going to answer. So this is MSD Jessa or Miss Jessa. I don't know how to say that. How do you say your username? Do you know any good reconstructed Aztec weapons, and have you handled any? No, I'm afraid not. I have seen pictures of well reconstructed Aztec weapons, and I won't try and say its name, but the famous wooden sword with obsidian blades embedded in it. I've seen pictures of them from friends of mine who live in Mexico. But I don't know where they got them made, and I've never handled them, and I don't really know if they are actually genuinely well made and good examples. But they look awesome, and yeah, Aztec weapons and that kind of bit of history is something I'd like to learn more about. I don't really know an awful lot. Korg in Tasmania, hi. Mistar says context. Yep, context. It's all about the context. And Almus Koich, is that right? Says, were medieval helmets made from tempered steel? Sometimes yes, there's the answer. Okay, so when we get into the 14th and 15th century, yes, a not large percentage, but a significant percentage of the helmets that we have available to test are made of quenched and tempered carbon steel. Yes. However, lots of others were made of unhardened carbon steel, and lots of others were made of iron or mild steel. So you get a full range. And okay, I'm going to do one more question. Here we go. So Woody Enfermo says, does Superdry sponsor you, or do you simply like their clothes? Yeah, do you know what? I'm really unimaginative. I used to be into clothes, and I can't be bothered to be anymore. So I just go. Superdry stuff fits me quite well most of the time, so I just go to Superdry and buy something when I need a new piece of clothes. But I am thinking of switching allegiances and moving away from Superdry now. I'm not sure what to. So suggestions below, very welcome. That's it, the Macahutl. I don't know how to say it. That's the name of the Aztec sword. I don't even know how to say that word. Hi from India. Hi, Saksham Pandi. Hi in India. Good to see you. Hi from Brazil. Hi from Slovakia. Padush, where's the Brazil one gone? That's sorry. As you're bringing greetings from Chile. Wow, there's people from everywhere. That's amazing. Tempered steel versus Damascus steel. Well, you can have tempered Damascus steel, but I guess you mean regular carbon steel versus pattern welded steel. So basically, homogeneous carbon steel is actually mechanically the best. That's why we use it in the modern world for things like car springs. But Damascus, also pattern welding and Woots, were attempts to try and get something as almost as good as what we've got in the modern world using period techniques. Right, penetration, yes. On that note, I think I'm going to go. Context clothing, if only there was a context. Maybe a Bannerlord, yes. Greetings from Finland, hi from California, hey guys. Western Oregon, cool. Mountain Blade, Bannerlord hype, yes. You got super chat. Right, okay, this is brilliant. I'm going to have to log off now because I need to go to bed and I've got stuff to do. But it's been absolutely awesome. I think I'll definitely do another one of these live things. This has been really good fun. I seem to have been talking for 45 minutes, so it's not surprising that I feel like I need a drink now. But anyway, thanks a lot. Hi from Switzerland. Hi, Samuel. Hi from Hungary. Hello, Zoltan. Hi from Texas. Yeah, it's really difficult to turn off, but I'm going to have to do it now. Thanks so much for watching. Obviously, you can keep commenting under this video. I think this will appear in my videos list now. This is all very new to me. There's Oscar. He wants his food, so I'm going to have to go. See you guys soon. Thanks for contributing, and thanks for following the channel, obviously. See you guys.